Welcome to In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay, where we get candid about what it takes to negotiate effectively. You'll learn from the challenges and successes of entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. We help you change the nature of your negotiations and get more from every deal you do.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to In the Ven Zone, where we talk about negotiation and how negotiation is a relationship and how those relationships affect you in your business as well as in your personal life. And today I am super excited to have one of my mentors, Mr. Blair Dunkley, as a guest with us today. Blair is the founder of Rewiring the Mind. He is a profiler and a behavioral researcher and a creator of mind models. He's a lifelong entrepreneur, and he provides people with the tools needed for rapid change that would empower them in their life and in their business. He's devoted over 40 years to researching behavioral patterns. 37 of those years he spent developing mind models and was the head of the behavioral research for Life Skills College, where he developed a language-based profiling system. As a certified master trainer of life skills coaches, then president and CEO, Blair has worked with people to change their behavior and has done that for decades. He is an amazing, interesting, intriguing, and one of the absolute smartest people I have ever met in my life. And when I first met Blair a few months ago, he profiled me and he told me something about me that only my husband has ever told me. And that was that I'm a very hard person to get to know. And it is true. I actually am. And so he's blown my mind. In the time that I have been working with Blair, I have been able to put language to things and behaviors and kind of things that I do as a negotiator and as a person. And Blair has given me the language to do that. So because it's been such an incredible help to me as a negotiator, I wanted to bring Blair on to share with you some of the amazing things that I have learned so that you can apply it to the things that you're doing in your day-to-day negotiations. So Blair, thank you for being here. I'm super glad to have you. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Blair actually has some amazing stories on negotiation that he's going to share with us today too, because he's done some really cool stuff. So you're in for a real treat. So Blair, thanks for joining me. So glad to have you here on In the Ven Zone.
Thank you for inviting me to In the Ven Zone. That's super. Christine, it's awesome. Thanks.
So kind of fill in a little bit more about your background. Tell us kind of how you have gotten to this point and what drew you to working with mind models.
Wow, big question. I'll try and keep it as short as I possibly can and tight. I was working, actually I was a co-founder back in the day, ripe old age of 21. I knew I wanted to work with people, and my mother and I started a private post-secondary educational institution, eventually called Life Skills College. And Life Skills College wound up having 23 campuses and over 1,000 students around the country.
Wow.
And our primary target, while it was all government funded, but the majority, my mother came in with a view on mental health. So everything had a mental health bent to it. Mm-hmm. And we adapted work that was research done by the government, they spent $42 million in 5 years to research and define 362 core competencies. But that was primarily for Native population and inner city individuals, mm-hmm. not for mental health. So we had to adjust and make some rather significant adjustments to that. And that's where the mind model research kicked in. Mm-hmm. It also kicked in when I was trained as a mindset facilitator. And I was teaching and incorporating mindset into the whole area of life skills back in the day. Mm-hmm. My father wound up going into a coma, actually open heart surgery and coma, which 2 weeks after he got off the operating table, they called us in to the hospital to be notified that it was 99% probable that my father would never come out of a coma, and he never did. So they were right. That's the coma thing is another story. But that evening I went home, I collapsed in the shower, and I was crying my eyes out, shaking convulsively and crying, and life was not going well for me at that moment. And I worked hard at attempting to get my life back in order. I practiced mindset. I practiced life skills. Life skills worked a little bit, mindset not at all. I thought I had an unshakable mindset. I didn't. It got shaken so badly by that one incident, I became pretty much unhinged for a little bit. 2 weeks later, I went back to my trainer, my mindset trainer, and she walked me through the same exercises that I attempted to put myself through, but to no avail. And she wound up telling me quite bluntly that it was because I just didn't believe enough. And working at Life Skills College with 80% of your student population being potentially suicidal,
Right.
I found that overwhelmingly unconscionable. You can't tell somebody
Yeah.
that your stuff doesn't work because they don't believe enough.
Yep.
That's just ludicrous.
Mm-hmm.
I gave her the bird, told her to F you, and left and never spoke with her again in my life to date. Probably never will, unless it's accidental. Because I was infuriated by the lack of effectiveness of that. I began researching, and one of the pivot points was how to literally pivot my life. And I needed to create a mind model. One of the many mind models, over 100 that I've actually generated, is called the pivot, the mind model, the pivot post, because it was about a pivot that I made as a result of my dad going into coma and everything else. We don't have time to get into that and make it relevant, but it gave me the ability to change the direction of my life almost instantaneously in less than 24 hours with my father. And then 33, well, no, almost 40, about 38 years, no, 32, sorry, I got to do the math here. About 32 years later, I wound up recognizing, well, I am now separated, as you know, and about 18 months ago, my ex asked me for a divorce. And I was left my home, flew to a job site, a coaching consulting job that I had in Chicago. I was in a hotel in Chicago, and walking towards the shower in that evening, feeling discouraged, feeling like I was going to burst into tears again. And I noticed in that heartbeat that I flashed back to my dad and to that whole scenario with the pivot post that I wound up using. I went and used that pivot post mind model again and pivoted my life. And I just did up my shirt, walked back to the desk, started writing out where I was, got myself back into the present, not in the past, looking towards the future, but definitely in the present, and looking how I can pivot my life. I noticed that I've done that many, many times with helping individuals overcome their own personal processes that they're stuck in. Basically, indirectly, and not that so indirectly, it's a lot of negotiation that a person either does with themselves or with their life and their circumstances, or with others in their life where they need to change.
Right.
Well, it was all three of those, and that also makes up another part of my mind models, which is self, other, and situation. But applying that with the pivot post, all of a sudden, I resolved probably 95% of my marital discourse in that moment with where I was going, what I was going to do, and how my life was going to now pivot. And I was able to do that and resolve something that could have taken me years in a matter of, well, probably no more than 90 minutes.
I think that's one of the things that I really love about the things that you teach and that you talk about is, and we were talking about it before we started recording, is that you give intention to things that we may intuitively do or not, but you create this notion of intent, and it allows the learner, i.e. me, everybody, to, to then make decisions that are intentional, so that I'm not letting something happen to me. I'm making conscious decisions and choices about how I'm going to be in a certain situation, how I'm going to behave in a certain situation, and what I'm going to say in a certain situation. And I have to tell you, to all the audience, I mean, the stuff that Blair does is just incredibly powerful. It is potent in terms of what it means for certainly for me as a student of Blair's, but also in my interactions with others and how I'm able to communicate differently and influence others and allow others to influence me. It creates an openness, which, as you know, those of you who've listened to me or who know me, for me, negotiation is about relationship. And I was talking to a mutual acquaintance of Blair and I's earlier, and interviewed him, and he's on a different show, but Kevin Thompson and I were talking, and I say often that negotiation and contracts and business relationships are about the hope of a better future that we get to create together. And oftentimes I think people forget that negotiation is about the hope of a future based on what we know about things today. So some of the things that you and I've talked about, Blair, and thank you very much for sharing that story. I'll have to share some things with you off camera right now. I'm not ready to share them in person. I'll share them here yet, though over time I'm sure I will be. But I have tremendous amount of empathy for your situation and kind of the emotions that you go through and or we're going through. And I personally very much appreciate the work that you've done over time in the mental health arena. So I thank you. Personally, I thank you.
It's also so needed today, like with all this COVID stuff that's out there, and the coping, the undermining of social norms and values due to circumstances, not necessarily people, just circumstances. Right. COVID being one, the election being another thing, just on and on.
Yeah, it definitely, I think that anyone who says that this is not a crazy time is not
crazy.
Crazy. If you're out there saying this is not a crazy time, yeah, you're probably a little crazy. I have to say it, because there is just a lot going on. Floods and locusts, and all we need are toads falling out of the sky. And we'll have it all. It'll all be there. But let's talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done in negotiations. So before we started recording, Blair and I had a wonderful conversation before we hit record. You were telling me this amazing story about a merger that you were working on. And, I think one of the things that I've talked about many times is how when we are negotiating, we often don't discover the full value of something that's actually available to us and to our counterparts. So we negotiate, for, a pen, instead of like taking all the pieces of the pen apart and going, do you want this part? Do you want the clip? Do you want the ink? And we don't dissect it enough. And you had this great story that you were sharing with me. And I have a long history in M&A and divestitures. And so I love this story. Tell us more about that example that you were sharing.
I had a client that I was consulting with at the time, and I was there to help him shift how people think. By the way, that's what I do. I don't tell people what to do. I show people how they can shift their thinking, how to think differently, basically, and not what to think about. But in this, he said, Blair, I'm doing this acquisition, this merger, actually, of this company, and I'd really like to bring you out because we have a very tight budget, and I'm concerned with this whole thing. Okay, fair ball. Ray, let's go. So we flew out and met the company, the president, and the ownership and whatnot, and walking around and seeing how everything played out. All of a sudden, I realized that in here, even though the owner was attempting to up our price and get it beyond what we could afford, I heard in his language pattern how he was thinking. And he was thinking about just how he could get the best price for a single sale. When we flew back, actually, shortly after we left that meeting, I told my client, Ray, you got to make this guy your best friend because I'm profiling that the other people are after something else that's different than what we were after, and you got to make him your best friend. And you've got great skills of creating relationships and buddying up with people, and you'll get him to spill the beans. I know it. So just go there, talk to him, make him your best friend, and find out what the other company wants. Well, as it turned out, the other company wanted everything. Well, actually, only one thing. They were prepared to pay millions for just the list, the customer list, and that was it. Everything else would have been dismantled and blown out. And the only thing that Ray didn't need was the customer list. So I got with that negotiation, I was able to get it so that our acquiring president was able to sell his company twice. Once and strike a deal, and I taught Ray exactly how to structure this. And this was, Ray, make sure that guy sells the company as just the list, not everything else. And that he guarantees that he'll divest himself and change the market in which that company was built. So it's a non-competitive scenario. Just insist on that. And because you want to buy everything else, but everything else, the value of everything else plummeted from millions down to literally 400,000.
That's amazing.
And he was able to scoop it up for pennies on the dollar.
That's amazing.
As a result. And the guy made his millions plus an extra 400,000, for himself. So, I mean, it's a great win-win for that scenario.
When we were talking earlier about how, at Harvard, they talk about win-win. And I always, I love my Harvard professors, and it was an honor to be able to learn from those professors because they are masters at their craft. But I used to get into huge debates about the whole concept of win-win. And I always use the story of an egg, and it's like you got three people who want the egg, and how do you separate it? Well, you can't take a raw egg and separate it in thirds very easily. And so most people are like, oh my gosh, well, only one person's going to get the egg. And then somebody usually says, oh, well, I can boil the egg and then we can divide it in thirds, right? So we all each get an equal third of the egg. Or then you have somebody who's like really thinking as a negotiator and says, but what if I poke a hole in the egg, take a pen and poke a hole in it, drain the yolk and the white, separate the yolk from the white. Now I have an empty eggshell that I can use to either compost or use for art. I have an egg white that I can use to make a souffle, and I have an egg yolk that I can use to glaze a pie or something, whatever. But that concept of being able to divide something, and when you can separate and you can see that interconnectivity among different things, that's when negotiation gets super exciting, because you're able to then find additional ways of creating value that you didn't think existed in the first place. But to do that, you had to ask questions. You had to ask good questions. Talk to us, because that's one of the things that Blair is really, one of the lessons I've learned from Blair is the how to ask questions in a different way. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think the audience can, this is something that listen very closely to what Blair says, because this is something that will revolutionize how you ask for things and whether or not you have success in getting the things that you've asked for.
Right. So one of the key elements that is happening is, well, first of all, I needed to do fundamental research on an area that I eventually named question concepts. And recognizing how, and this is, I'm going to give you an overview, not an in-depth piece, because the in-depth piece takes a minimum of 3 hours to train. But think about this, like really think about it. Every utterance out of your mouth is filtered through a question concept. And those question concept names, not the concepts, just the names, are who, what, when, why, and where and how. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those 6. Mm-hmm. That's it. The key element going forward here is, well, first of all, I want to point out to people who are studying artificial intelligence and mostly language-based intelligence, like a computer talking, how they've got something fundamentally screwed up. So I've recently become relaxed around this, but I didn't want to share it, but I think I will. But I'm not going to give you the details. But they think that there's 8 fundamental questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and how, plus which, and unspecified.
All right.
Which, if they bothered to get a good dictionary, the which terminology is just a grammatical correction for what? What one do you prefer? Which one do you prefer? Every iteration of that can sometimes clunky, sometimes clumsily, but the meaning
Absolutely.
is captured by what? Because it's just a grammatical correction. And unspecified.
What the heck does that mean?
Pardon me?
What does that mean?
Well, do you like that?
No.
Well, do you like that is unspecified. There's no who, what, where, when, why, or how in that.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So do you like that? And you go, no, it's a question. But what did the question generate? It generated an answer, as all questions must. But the type of answer is to a what? And one of the areas is the function of one of the columns in the question concepts is the function of it. What does it do? Mm-hmm. Well, what's always generate a list of one or more things or events.
Oh, I like that, because that creates options.
It does. But do you like that? Well, the option here is yes or no.
Right.
It's an event in your mind that is externally verifiable based on your future behavior.
Right.
And verifiability is critical to be able to figure out effectiveness of questions. Why questions? Why do you do that?
You have taught me. I do not like that question anymore.
Good. Well, do you notice how it just scrambled my brain when I said that? Like, it just scrambled your brain. First of all, it's out of context, which helps for the scrambling effect. But the second thing is why don't you like the why question? Everybody loves the why question.
I don't think anyone likes the why question.
Okay, so do you notice how you had to get a pleasant yet defensive response to that?
Exactly. That's the thing about why. So, and it was because of our conversation around, I mean, how many parents out there ask their children, why did you do that? Or why did you not do that? That why question, like, you did that to me when the first time you did that to me, all I could hear was my mother in the back of my head going, and I don't like how I feel. I don't like that. I don't like that question. It just raises all sorts of, negative emotions around, oh, what is my way of doing it the wrong way? Is that a wrong way? Is there a right way? Is there a better way? It's like just raise
Every one of those ways that you're talking about is all judgmentally based.
Exactly. But that's how I feel about why now, is that it's just it has this emotive thing to it.
It's not a thing. It's a requirement.
Okay.
Okay, this thing that you're saying, it has this emotive thing. I've never taught you the question concepts. It is in the deeper learning and training that I do. But
I can't wait for that, by the way. I'm like so excited about it.
It is fundamental to how all whys are. And it's crazy because Simon Sinek, I mean, great guy, nice guy, I'm sure. Have never met him, but his work on the why, like, you need to know your why. Pardon me, but bullshit. Like, I'm just calling bullshit.
Everyone talks about needing to know your why.
Robbins
talks about it. Dean Graziosi. Everyone talks. You've got to know your why.
Bullshit. Like, it is the worst thing that you can possibly focus on, simply because your why will load emotions first and force you to go into reasons, excuses, rationalizations, and justifications, plus other things that are all ineffective. Okay, number one. Number two, the cool thing about this is nobody's bothered to do the frickin' research on the fact that I can use a different question, concept, title, word of a who, what, when, why, or how, and you will likely know instantly which actual question concept I actually used. Now, I'm gonna just yell at you and the listeners here. What did you do that for? Tell me right now. What did you do that for? Which question concept did I actually use? A who, what, when, where, why, or how?
Well, it sounded like you're using a what, but it felt like it was a why.
So which one is it, in fact? A what or a why?
Oh, see, now I'm not good at this. I'd say it's a why question.
You're right. It is.
Why did you do that?
And over 90% of the people will agree with you. I've tested this thousands of times. We intuitively know, even though I used the what word.
Yeah, it was very judgmental. It was
absolutely
very
it
judgmental.
loaded the emotion first. It put you into a stuck state of having to be, defensive.
Yes.
And if you look back at me yelling at you briefly, you knew that I was going to, but in spite of that, you had a little slight flush to your face.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love, Paul Ekman is one of my heroes of psychology on the planet. For those of you who don't know, if you've never watched the TV show Lie to Me, Paul Ekman is all about microexpressions and how microexpressions are universal to every human being on the planet, no matter where they are, no matter what their culture is, everything. And so I could feel my face react to, even though you're right, because it's automatic. It's not, you can't think about your microexpressions. That's what's so incredible about it. So Paul Ekman's work is just really phenomenal. I want to get Paul Ekman on in the Venn Zone someday too, because his work is just amazing. So
it is. And I really align with his work, by the way. All I do is I use language patterns to do similar kinds of work. Not the same.
Very powerful stuff.
It gives you sub-minimal clues. Because people will actually tell you how they're thinking by understanding the question concepts and pairing that, because that's one of the mind models, but pairing that and stacking those with other mind models. And when we start stacking, we can get to a form of clarity in the moment, as opposed to always being certain. And everybody's going after certainty, and certainty has been around for over 100 years as being a psychological necessity, which is no longer true. Just like whys.
Yeah, this is also this Blair is one of the things that you've talked to me about that I just really it resonates so much with me. So to our listeners, this is a huge thing, this notion of clarity versus certainty. It's applicable in every aspect of your life, but absolutely as you are negotiating, this clarity certainty concept is huge. So keep going, Blair, because this one's a big deal.
It is. Clarity versus certainty. First of all, it's a mind model that I had to figure out years ago because so many people are stuck. They're stuck in their why. So how come they're in this stuck state? There's two major types of stuck states, why being one of those two. Now, how do people stay stuck in something that they inherently feel stuck in and can't seem to escape from? They have to have supporting information, evidence they call it, but it's not, it's all internally verifiable only. It's not externally verifiable. When it's internally verifiable, you feel it to be true for you, but it's not true for anybody else, and you can't prove it to anybody else.
Right.
Unless you indoctrinate them in your model of the world, and then they come into your stuck state, which you can have mass movements that are in stuck states. Okay, it can all be indoctrinated. And people want to believe because it's less work to believe the belief than it is to test the belief to figure out if it actually works. And if somebody else behaves in a way that is in accordance with a belief, you go, beliefs are the only way. Well, it's not the only way. In fact, behaviors create beliefs, not beliefs create behaviors.
I'll write that down, everyone. Behaviors create beliefs, not the other direction. Behaviors create beliefs. This is huge. You guys are learning a lot. Blair is like not holding back, and I love it.
Well, I sort of am, but I'm not diving into deep depth. If you believe me, then believe this to be true because it's tested, externally verifiable. And everything that I'm saying about this stuff is 100% externally verifiable. I can give you either thought experiments or real life tests that you can run to make a clear determination that don't trust me, don't believe me, test me. That's the whole thing with mind models. Mind models are always identifiable, repeatable, and duplicatable. They have to meet that standard.
Yep.
And they can't be my opinion because my opinion isn't worth squat. My opinion is just my opinion. But my observable behaviors are worth everything because that's how I can shift myself or others. Like I can control myself, shift myself, or influence others. I can't control them, but I can influence them.
Right.
Okay? Now, this whole thing here about going back to clarity versus certainty, if you give somebody a simple model that they're certain about and they don't have to think about anything else, what is the whole thing about developing your brain over time? Your brain always, well, it doesn't like a vacuum, but it doesn't like spending more energy than it has to.
Yeah.
So if somebody can give you a belief that it apparently was behaved by somebody else, by the way, think about this in terms of every religion in the world. Somebody, some messiah, some person out there, some person who is heading up that religion behaved something.
Right.
A story around that behavior was then stated and repeated for everybody to believe in, to find the evidence for the belief in the behavior. 100% of the time. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be your behavior. It just has to be behaved.
Sure.
And the belief can be generated and passed generation to generation, person to person, parishioner to parishioner, doesn't matter. It all comes into alignment.
Right, right.
And there's a president right now that's got a lot of ability to say things that people want to align to so they can stay where they are.
So he says things so that to try to align people. But it is interesting with him because I find his behaviors and the words he says oftentimes to be inconsistent and incongruous.
Exactly.
And yet people follow the belief and not the behavior in some regards.
Correct. How come?
Yeah.
How come?
I have no idea. Well, because it's easier. It's
exactly. Thank you. It's just that simple.
It's easier. Yeah.
And
so,
the people,
they're not the same. That's for sure.
Correct. What he espouses is he talks to the lowest common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells each subgroup whatever they want to hear. They align with him, the person, the person that is perceived as the person, and he does not have to keep the alignments the same when he talks to different groups.
Oh, and that's the beauty of that as a model, right? I mean, if you are that person, if you are or somebody like that person, right? You can tell 15 different people 15 different things, and as long as they'll believe you, then it doesn't matter that any of those things are aligned or not aligned, because
what is the commonality? What's the commonality? You've already stated it, by the way, and this is for everybody out there that's listening to this. This comes down to deep listening.
Yeah.
What's the commonality?
He definitely speaks to them at where they're at.
Nope, not necessarily. He does, but that's all different speaking.
So enlighten me.
I can rephrase and go, so who's the commonality?
Well,
who's the focal point?
Well,
does it matter if people see him from different directions?
No, as long as they're seeing him.
Exactly.
As long as they see him.
Matter.
Yep.
Because when you focus in on something that somebody chooses to believe, they just have to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And if that person says, you're right, and another person gives a different version of a belief that's maybe even somewhat opposite or different, but he then goes, you're right too, both those groups focus in on him and go,
right,
we're right.
Yep. Well, this is really interesting. We've never talked about this before, but this is a fascinating concept, because one of the things that I see in negotiation all the time.
Oh, good. Sorry, I was just going to say, because this is something that I've noticed when I have to go to negotiate at different levels. I have to see where these connections are and who's aligning with who. And how do those structures actually operate?
When I actually break it down I talk about the difference between faith-based negotiation and fact-based negotiation. So, and I may simplify it more than it is, but to me, it's like, if you have a situation, I can't negotiate against faith. I can't negotiate faith. Faith is it's an internalized thing. It's it isn't about logic. It's not about reason. It's a feeling, and that belief factor that you just talked about. It's hard to negotiate with belief, with that faith.
Sorry, go ahead. I want to come back to this.
Yeah. So the fact-based component. So I am a very, and people, whoever ever negotiates with me, all you have to do is listen to this program and you're going to learn a lot about how to negotiate with me. But I'm a very fact-driven negotiator. So I'm heavily researched. I dig into the details. I learn about the person or the people that I'm negotiating. I learn about their business. I learn how they make money. I learn what drives profit. I learn about what's going on in the market and who their competition is. I mean, I get heavily researched. So for me, when I'm negotiating with somebody who is 100% faith-based and no logic comes into play at all, that is a very challenging negotiation for me, because reason doesn't come to play. And that's a hard thing for me, because it's like my faith is based on the reason I find in my logic, and theirs is based on a belief that's only internally verifiable, not externally verifiable, but my fact-based stuff is externally verifiable. So it creates a really interesting tension, and how you overcome that in a negotiation is, and this is why a lot of people see negotiation as combative, because when you're in that fact versus faith-based negotiation, it sometimes can devolve into a combative situation. And pulling out of that and finding ways to pull out of that is the only way you're going to be able to come to an agreement. Where were you going? I hope you guys, I hope the listeners are enjoying this, because I'm having a blast on this. This is awesome.
Well, what I was going to do was I was going to point out to you, there are some tools and mind models that actually help you shift and help somebody else, help influence somebody to potentially shift their belief, to open a crack, not into facts, but into an alternative belief. So they're already belief based, which is emotion. So where is, for lack, I don't do it this way, but just to explain it and simplify it, where's the chink in their belief? Because everybody has one.
Sure.
So,
Everyone has a doubt. There's always a doubt
right,
somewhere.
exactly. And so in that doubt, there's an opening for an alternative belief, which can be supported by the belief part of the facts. So what do the facts move people? Because the facts could be viewed as behaviors.
Absolutely.
Because they almost are always generated by some form of behavior.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if that's generated by a behavior, then what does that behavior generate as a belief? And when you get to that level of game, all of a sudden, by understanding, like frequently people are into certainty around their belief, but they are uncertain about how this negotiation is going to fall out. They don't know how it is. They're not, they say that they are, but they don't look at their tells are there, so that there's a level of uncertainty. But if I go, do you mind if I ask you a question about, how clear you are around your desired result? And they generally say yes. And they generally give me an argument that is certain. But clarity in the world, certainty means that it's stuck. The world is changing very quickly. And you can almost always use that as the wedge in somebody who's in a certainty position. And so how do we manage? Just fill me in. Again, with a question, you said you wanted to do this. I want to make it an action question and force them to give me an action. So how do we reconcile the rapid pace of change so that we can optimize your outcome?
Right. That's it. That's huge. That's so huge.
Their brain gets fried and they have to go to clarity.
Right.
I didn't say the word clarity.
Right.
But how do you get them to optimize without clarity?
Now, I want to say to the listeners, I said, because I can envision, I can see the faces. If I close my eyes, I can see the faces of some of you who are listening who might be saying, this feels a little manipulative. But here's the thing. I don't personally feel it's manipulative. Negotiation is all about finding common ground.
Perfect.
You can't resolve a solution, a problem. You can't move forward as two individuals or two companies, two entities, if you haven't found common ground. So in a negotiation, if you're sitting with a counterpart, there's already, at that moment when you engaged with a counterpart, you already believe that there is a reason to have some level of common ground. So what Blair's talking about is not about manipulating. It's about how do you take and peel back the conversation in a way that gets to what that common ground is. Like that V on our logo for Venn negotiation, which is all about that cradling of that common ground. And so what you're describing, Blair, is really how to get to that. How do you take that faith-based component and peel it back so that it becomes that area where you can find those pieces that work together for both of you?
Absolutely true. And by the way, it is also inherently non-manipulative because there are ways of making it more manipulative or making it manipulative, period,
Mhm.
and ways of making it more based on curiosity. And when
Mm,
it comes from a curious standpoint and you're sincerely curious, as I was
mhm.
and would be again, if I
Yep.
used that, I'd want to know how they're thinking about it.
Right.
Not what they're thinking, but how are they taking a look at it? And are they actually being fair to themselves with
Mm,
their own position? Because occasionally
mm.
I've found so much value in their position that I'm actually prepared to pay them more than what they were asking.
Right.
Because it seems completely unfair and unjustifiable to me to give somebody just what they asked for
Mm.
because it's unconscionable once I learn what the actual value is.
And this reinforces what you're talking about here reinforces something that I say all the time. Price is not always an input and should not always be an input into a negotiation. Price should be considered an output of a negotiation. It is an output of a series of conversations that happens so that you are developing price based off of what is fair. How
Correct.
and you don't know that if you go in starting with price, as many of us, especially in the Western hemisphere, do, right? We go in and we lead with price, and it's like, but what's all the other stuff that matters? How did you get to price? What are all those assumptions, and what are those questions that you didn't ask that would let you know whether or not the price you're asking for or offering is actually a fair price for what you're getting?
Exactly. So, one of my more critical mind models is curiosity.
Mm, love
Now, one of the fundamental pieces here, now this goes into other states. When people are into fully internalizing themselves and they are emotively connected and to their certainty,
it. Hmm.
and they're in their why state, and this is why, and this is why, and this is why, and they're easily argumentative. Some of them will get themselves into literally, from a neurological point of view, their limbic system will take over, and they'll be in fight or flight, and they will opt in for fight.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the only way, and this comes from doing a lot of work in suicide prevention, in getting people out of depression, in getting people out of all kinds of stuck states. And then that was early in my career, then transitioning into corporate work and recognizing how simple it is to take curiosity when somebody is stuck and rigidly focused in certainty about how things should be and must be for
Mm-hmm.
everything to work out. And if people don't get in line, then get them out of the way because I'm going through. And they lose their companies not infrequently over that.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. And it just causes everything to go to hell in a handbasket and
Mm-hmm.
blow up on them because they're way, way, way too rigid in their whole methodology. Now, they're stuck in their belief and their limbic system and literally creating a limbic loop stuck state. When you're in a limbic loop stuck state, you can literally physiologically get a brownout in your prefrontal cortex, which is your executive part of your brain, where you
Mm-hmm.
do all of your serious thinking in your prefrontal cortex. Well, how do you get
Wow.
somebody from their limbic system into their prefrontal cortex?
Wow.
Found only one word that will, or one behavior linked to one word that is both emotional and fires off in the prefrontal cortex.
Mm.
The emotion that we get is primary. In other words, an infant in the APGAR scale, when you have a
Yep.
baby,
Yep.
you have 9 things that you look for.
Yeah.
One of them is actually the test to see if a baby can root around and latch on and suckle
Right.
at that point and feed. But if a baby is crying of hunger and is put to the mother's breast and does not suckle, rejects the breast, rejects the food, they know that that baby, that brain development has not been sufficient enough to cause that baby to become curious.
Wow. Oh, wow. That is hugely powerful. The power of curiosity. That
It is
is,
unbelievable.
wow.
I use it all the time. This
That's,
is a big tip, guys. Big tip.
and that, that's, a lot of people, we talk about, when people come up to me when I'm speaking, they'll talk to me about how they hate negotiating. They hate the topic. They think it's combative and it's aggressive and it's this. But what you've just shared is that if you can take that combative counterpart and you can use curiosity and ask questions that reinforce your sincere curiosity, because
Bingo.
I do not believe curiosity can be faked. You cannot fake curiosity. And so if you use
You can feign curiosity. You can't fake it.
okay,
You can pretend to be, but you aren't really, and everybody knows it.
and it's easy to detect.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like that's really easy to detect if somebody's
It is.
asking you, right? So if you show sincere curiosity through the questions that you're asking, you can convert that combative person on the other side, and you can soften them in a way that allows you to discover.
I want to actually give you more precise
Okay, go
way
for it.
of language of understanding that. It does do that eventually, but what it does do is it takes your limbic loop, because the emotion of curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
if it's faked, it's not the emotion. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a trick.
Right,
It's
right.
words.
Right.
You're
And I
trying to
hate when
get
people talk negotiation and use tricks. This
yeah.
trick thing is
It's
garbage.
bullshit.
It doesn't,
It's just
it's, you can
people
see through
lie.
it. Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's fake. So when you actually get people out of their limbic system, you're behaving with curiosity, and that person's limbic brain can sense, hear, feel especially
Mm.
curiosity, because the limbic brain is all about emotion,
Mm-hmm.
fight or flight.
Yeah.
But curiosity is the only one emotion that will, how do you get that person curious? And they have to be curious. And you can use the word, are you curious enough to find a solution here? Are you curious to find common ground? Are you just putting that word in, plugging that into their head can break through so that their brain now fires from the limbic into the prefrontal cortex. But it must be done through a question.
Right. Wow. So that is hugely powerful. I mean, that's powerful in your business relationships, and just imagine what that can do on your personal relationships.
Well,
I mean,
it totally does.
holy cow. That's just massive right there.
Well, it's also
wow.
massive in the area of suicide prevention,
Yes.
because
Wow.
people go very, very dark. And we had 800 people potentially suicidal every night. I had to figure out things that actually worked, not theories, not long.
Mm.
I didn't have time for month-long counseling sessions.
Right. You
I
had
needed
this in
to
a moment.
shift people now.
Right. Wow. Blair, this has been I knew this was going to be amazing. I knew that I was going to learn a lot. I knew that you were going to just deliver in spades for the audience. This has just been phenomenal. How can people find you? Because the things that you teach and the things you talk about are they're revolutionary in many regards. And I just want to make sure people know how to find you, because I hope that you guys go find Blair. So you have a lot there still.
So rewiringthemind.com is one of my websites that you can jump on and take a look at it. If you're interested in tracking me down personally, then blairdunkley.com is also up. And if you're interested, you can, the way I met Christine was she signed up for a profiling session. So I do profiling. So for your people, I will make that available again.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, so I have to tell you, the profiling session with Blair was life-changing. I learned so much about me and how I interact with people. It was literally mind-blowing. And Blair has a bunch of programs, Rewiring Your Mind for Wealth, amazing. And so I strongly encourage you to check out rewiringthemind.com and blairdunkley.com, and I'll put those in the show notes so you can look at them. And if you have the opportunity to work with Blair, I cannot recommend him enough. Blair, thank you so much for being a guest on In the Ven Zone. I look forward to continuing our work together, and I look forward to having you back again as a guest at a future date. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and by that time, when you have me back, I'll have my book ready too.
Oh gosh, I'm so excited about his book.
Yeah.
Have you settled on a name for it yet?
Actually, this is my
yes, the ultimate mind. That's awesome. I love that cover. So very good. So that'll be out in January.
Yes, it will be. I'm going to try and get it out before Christmas, actually. But
all right. Well, we'll put information on that in the show.
By the way, it will be available at ultimatemindhacking.com because I've already got that. So if you want to throw that one up there too.
So we'll put all of your contact info. And again, everybody, if you have a chance to work with Blair, please take that opportunity. It will take you to a different level. So thank you, Blair, and have a good night. Have a good day, everyone. And we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay. We invite you to visit our website at www.ven.zone to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Empower the negotiator in you and successfully level the playing field. Join us again next time here on In the Ven Zone.